Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today to American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams and are committed to helping you pursue yours. I'm Monica. I'm a dream curator and a dreamer here at DreamBank. For those of you that have attended our virtual or in-person events in the past, welcome back. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'd love to take a moment to introduce you to DreamBank. Here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. It's why we created DreamBank. This is an inspirational community destination and digital experience dedicated to dreamers everywhere. From our daily event series to our immersive signature programs, there's something for absolutely every dreamer. Everything that we do here is dedicated to helping you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and stay motivated. This is the Impact for Good series, and today we're excited to have the Canopy Center here with us. The Canopy Center has a mission to help strengthen families, support children and teens and adults impacted by trauma and adversity. Executive Director Meaghan Henry is here with us to tell us more about this amazing program. Meaghan is an alumni of UW-Madison with a Bachelor in Science, with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a certificate in Criminal Justice. She also completed the Children's Law and Policy Executive Program at Loyola University. She has over a decade of experience working with children whom have experienced abuse or neglect and serves on several task force and work groups in the child welfare field. Please offer a warm DreamBank welcome to Meaghan. Hi, Meaghan.
Hi, Monica. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here with us today. I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, great. I want to start by just offering my gratitude for the opportunity to be here today and talk about the work of the Canopy Center and hopefully bring a better understanding about the families that we have the privilege to serve at my agency. So Monica did a great job of introducing myself. My name is Meaghan Henry. I'm the executive director of the agency. I've been in this role for about a year and a half. The Canopy Center is an umbrella nonprofit agency, which means that it's an agency that has a few programs within it. And my history with the agency is actually with one of those programs, the CASA program. So CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. It's found in 14 counties in Wisconsin and 49 states of the United States. And I started off my history with this agency as a volunteer for that program. At that time, and what's still true today, is all I had to do was be 21 years old and pass a background check. And from there, the CASA team would train me on how to serve in the role. The role is one that is court appointed by a judge in the system to work with a child who's experienced abuse or neglect and is under the protection of the courts. And so it was almost exactly 9 years ago today that I was assigned to serve my first kid in the program. It was a 3-year-old girl, and she had been removed from her mom's care because her mom had struggled with her mental health and it had brought about some safety concerns. And I was going to be introduced to her in mom's home. So I very much remember walking into mom's apartment to meet this little girl, and mom immediately started talking to me about a meeting that I actually had no context for. And I think she saw the confusion on my face pretty quickly. And that's when I learned that I look a little bit like her social worker. So she had confused me with the social worker, and that was kind of how we got started off. And a few minutes later, the social worker arrived to be there for my introduction to the family. And I was explaining to mom what it meant to be a CASA, that it was going to be my role to come every week to the home to get to know her and her daughter in particular, get to know how things were going. Each month or so, I would write a report that would go to the judge, to the social worker, to the attorneys on the case. And hopefully the observations that I made every week about how things were going would better inform the decisions that the court was making for this little girl. And so I proceeded to tell mom that, and I'll never forget her reaction to that as well. She said, "Did you see this as a flyer in a coffee shop?" And I thought, oh my goodness, this is how families could experience this. It's a very powerful volunteer role. And I was looking at it through my lens, but from mom's lens, she was thinking, there's a volunteer in my home, and how did she learn about this program? Why is she here? I think I explained to her that I actually learned about it years ago. In fact, in high school, I had read a book about a woman who had done the equivalent role down in Florida. And I was really just awe-inspired by this as a possible volunteer opportunity. I always kept it in my mind as I went to school. In school, I stayed adjacent to the social work field, but never jumped in. And in part, that was because I had a family friend. I was sitting in the living room when he came home from work one day. The dad set his bag down at the kitchen table and looked at, no one in particular, just said, "Never be a social worker." And he just looked so worn and beaten down, and went about his evening. And that moment really stood out to me as I thought about my career path. I don't know why I put so much weight on it. And the years that I spent working in this field, I feel like I can envision a social worker on any given day or week having that moment in their kitchen, walking home, feeling worn, beat down, and thinking, never be a social worker. But this is such an important field in our community. And I'm so grateful to the people who stick with it, who that label that as a bad day or a bad week and double down and come back the next week to continue to serve families. So the work that I did was, adjacent to the social work field, and I was really excited to get my first CASA case. This was a 3-year-old girl. She turned 4, and, I spent a lot of time with her, playing on the floor. I think we built Jenga towers. She was quite the artist, so we would do art projects. I would be in the apartment hallway with her while she was riding her bike back and forth, and just basically showing up every week. That's what I think was the most important part about my role, was showing up every week. And mom was incredibly dedicated to the work that she was doing to get her daughter reunified, to be placed back in her home so that she could be the caregiver again. But she struggled mightily with some big things. Mental health is a big thing to struggle with. And I remember thinking about all the team meetings I went to where she would advocate for her child and think about what her child needed while she wasn't in her care. And she was so dedicated, but that didn't mean that she didn't falter in her steps towards having her child return to her home. And that's very normal. And I think we have to understand that after a particularly rough weekend where mom had asked for support, she had appropriately reached out to somebody who could help her care for her 3-year-old because she was struggling. I had gone to the child's daycare center. And, when you think about it, mom did everything that was appropriate. She asked for support. She provided a safe place for her daughter, but her daughter was impacted by how her placement had changed over the weekend, how her caregiver had changed, really unsure what would happen. And it was really showing in her behaviors in her daycare setting. And my role as CASA, my role always, even here today, is not to overshare about a family's personal history. That's private to them. It's confidential. They deserve that to have that protected. And I had gone to the daycare, I'd seen how she was doing. And afterwards, the teachers asked for a moment to talk to me, just kind of asking what was going on. They were noticing it in her behaviors. Being new in the role, new in the field, I knew I couldn't share much information. So I said, basically what I've said to you today, she had a hard weekend. Things have changed for her, and she's struggling some with that. And I noticed the relief that kind of washed over her daycare providers' faces when I gave that information. And I remember being surprised by that I basically gave just the tiniest nugget of information. So how could they have such a sense of relief following that? And I think, not being a daycare provider myself, I've never served in the role of teacher, but speaking to what I think happened there, I think there were 15 to 20 kids in a classroom at any given time. And what we know about child development is that structure, predictability can really help kids. So it's all about having a pattern to your day, and enforcing that pattern and structure so that the kids can all have a shared experience when there's such a big group. And I think somebody compared that in a previous training that I went to video games. I'm not a video game connoisseur. I play Mario and that's about it. But you think about Mario, if you're walking and you jump and then you fall into the hole hole, you lose the life and you start from the beginning, and if you jump and you fall in the hole again, you're going to lose your life and you're going to start from the beginning. And I think that predictability is why video games are a popular thing for kids. They know exactly what to expect. And even if it's frustrating that you keep missing the jump, they know exactly what it's going to be. And that's what it's like putting boundaries for kids. Like, they should have it be predictable. What happens when you challenge a boundary? What happens when you challenge a structure that's put forth for you? And so the daycare providers were, I think, wondering, do we need to think about structure for this kiddo who seems to be very dysregulated and acting out? And when I gave them that little bit of information, I think they went with path B, which was like, we need to be a soft space for this kid to land. We need to provide some understanding and some comfort. And so the relief that I saw from them was just understanding what is needed. And I think about that when I think about interagency collaboration. There's so much about the child welfare system where social workers are working really hard for families, but it interacts very directly with the court system and the judges that make the decisions for families and what services are ordered, and often with other systems like the academic system. The school system is a big one. And, these are big systems that are meant to work together to be able to best support families, but also trying to respect families throughout that process and not overshare their information when it doesn't need to be. And there was so much about what I thought about in my first CASA role of just being a person. And I think I've carried that forward as a general understanding about the work. Sometimes it's not about having all the answers. It's about showing up and being a person in that moment for them. I got to work with this family for a while. It was well over a year. And when it came time for the case to close, she had been placed back with mom's care. She was 4 years old. Everything had been resolved, and it was time for the courts and the child welfare system to step out of this family's life. And that included myself in their CASA role. But I had worked really well with the family over time. I think mom and I really developed a liking for one another. And I can remember being at the park on the last visit, and the little girl was swinging and mom was talking to me about how I could be her Friday night babysitter. Because as a CASA, I could not assume the caregiving role for this family. It was my role to be there and visit with the child, but mom was to be the caregiver during that time. And so she thought, okay, now I got my Friday night babysitter. My husband and I can go out each Friday night and there'll be someone here predictably to care for my child. And so I remember laughing about that. And then I also remember being surprised in the coming months when the case was closed, how quickly we lost contact with each other. I think that she had every intent of staying in touch with me and that we had developed a good relationship. But when the case was closed, it was time for this family to close that chapter of their lives. It had been an incredibly difficult chapter. And, it's time sometimes to just leave that behind. And I was a component of that. For mom, even if she liked me, my role had been court ordered. She had to respond to me about coming out for a visit. And now she didn't anymore. She didn't have to return that text message and make a plan with me. So even though I do truly believe that she probably meant to stay in touch with me, the sense of relief that she didn't have to have me in her home every week was unexpected for her. And she did embrace that, and they moved forward with their family. And I support that, even though I wish we could have stayed in touch. And I'm grateful because this is one example of one case. And our CASA program at the Canopy Center serves dozens of families every year. And, those cases sometimes close with a volunteer and family expecting to stay in touch. And I'm grateful that I understand the volunteer when they feel sad that the family didn't keep contact afterwards, because there's so much about the structure of support that we provide that feels informal. It feels like a natural support. And yet it's a court-ordered support with a parameter set on it to make sure that it serves its overall purpose, which is to inform the judge and legal parties about how things are going. If things are steadily going well, the court parties feel like they're making the best choices for kids, making the best decisions about what services to court order, what placements are best for them. And so it serves that purpose, even if it feels like a very natural support to be in the hallway with a kid while they ride a bike. And so I share that with you to kind of outline what a case could look like within that program of the agency. But like I said, the agency has a couple of different programs. So the Canopy Center is a umbrella agency. Like I said, it's been in Dade County for 45 years. It started as a really small grassroots organization. It was just parents reaching out to other parents and supporting one another. And that happens still informally in our community all the time. And that's where its roots are. It was founded by a woman who realized that her childhood experiences were impacting her ability to provide good and safe parenting for her child, some of those responses that she had as a child. And she was working with other parents to support one another, and they all reflected on that as well, that their experiences as children in some ways were part of the reason why they needed the extra support as parents today. And so we feel really strongly about supporting parents who've had lived experiences, about, breaking that cycle and developing healthy parenting. And a lot of our programs are really aimed at supporting exactly that. The oldest of the programs is the OASIS program. And it's because some of that abuse history that parents were reflecting on, that I think when I say it probably feels like common sense too. I think nowadays we think, of course, our childhood impacts us as adults. Like, I don't think that that's groundbreaking, but I do think it felt like an aha moment for them 45 years ago. Maybe it wasn't quite as well understood. And the other piece of it was that many of them had experienced childhood sexual abuse, and the traumas from that were coming to the surface for them as parents as well. So the OASIS program, as one of the 3 programs of the Canopy Center, continues to provide that support. So it's a therapy program that provides treatment to children who've experienced sexual abuse, but then also supports the family as a unit. So the non-offending caregivers and siblings, they may also feel the impact of a child in a family disclosing that they've experienced sexual abuse. And so as a program, it works to support the child in their healing process, but then also to support the family unit to make sure that, everyone is healing from this, and that the child is going to a home where healing continues to be a focus, not just in the 1 hour of therapy, but in their home all week, every week. The third program that rounds out the structure of our agency is a supervised visitation program that started within the child welfare system. It used to be that social workers with the county would provide supervised visitation during the day, during the week, and they noticed a gap that for parents that work traditional hours and kids that go to school, if you want to make sure that you're having good, solid family contact while a child is placed out of the home, doing that visit from 2 to 4 on Fridays means missing a lot of school or a lot of work. And so the gap that they looked to fill was to put this program in place where nights and weekends visitation could be provided to families. And Parent to Child is developed in that model to fill that gap, to be able to meet families where they're at, to schedule at times that work better for them, being very flexible with that to the extent that they can. And now they serve not just child welfare involved families, but any family that might be court ordered to have supervised contact with children. That might be a custody case that comes up. And then they offer some parent education as well. So that focus on supporting families and children who've experienced abuse or neglect is still the focus of the agency. And one of the reasons why I thought it could be a really beneficial thing to have this presentation to the community to talk to you about this work is how often I think that this work is quite unseen by the community. And not only that, to acknowledge the hard work that our families are doing when they're in our space. Because when I talk about the powerful programming that CASA, OASIS, and Parent to Child offer, the successes that are had within those programs are entirely owned by the families who are doing the work. They're working to heal from previous traumas and develop healthy coping mechanisms. They're working to develop stronger and healthy relationships with the supportive family members that are going to be there for them. And I think another thing that they do that I think is worth holding up for community view and for all of us is that they accept help. And I think when I think about asking for help or accepting help, if you take a moment to think about that, do you notice yourself pull back at all? It is such a hard thing to ask for help. It is such a hard thing to accept help. and support. And yet we aim to create an environment where that can be done and be done in a way that feels good to families. We've designed a very trauma-informed space. We work to be very respectful of families that are in our environment to make sure that they have a space that speaks to the services that they're receiving from us. So it's very intentionally designed and hopes to meet their needs. And then our staff are very focused on that as well. We have a very passionate staff. My start with the CASA program started before it was a part of the Canopy Center. We were a standalone agency and we merged into the Canopy Center. And so I was already in the work when I got to meet the staff of the agency that were doing the programming of the other two programs of the agency. And I remember being just awe-inspired by the passion that people have for really hard work. That really spoke to me as somebody who was doing this work. And I think, acknowledging a few things, it's little things that make a really big difference. And so we can all show up for each other in those ways. And I think that, there's so much that I get to see from my vantage point, seeing the work firsthand. But as a community, I think, as I've said before, it's a little bit unseen, and part of that is due to confidentiality. And so, as I talk about these families that we serve and the work that's being done, I think what I would ask is approaching with curiosity, because I think curiosity would allow for you to understand that when we see things that hit the news, that tends to be more egregious cases, things that would cause media coverage or cause criminal charges. And there's a lot of work being done within the child welfare system, within the families that we're working with, that are largely unseen by typical media coverage. So if you think that your exposure to certain stories helps to gain a better understanding, I would ask that you continue to open up that curiosity for what maybe you don't see about trends that happen in our community and with families. And to talk about the work that's being done here and the passion that the staff bring forth. And so I'll acknowledge that it's not just staff that are doing the work here. We also have a strong commitment to learning. And I think it speaks to the curiosity piece. We have so many interns and volunteers that help to make this work possible. And everybody comes with a passion for the work. And to think about what it means to be in the same space with a child who's disclosed really difficult things, really challenging abuse histories that a lot of us would find ourselves naturally pulling away from. We have a team of staff, particularly I could talk about the OASIS program, where the work that they do in what's called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, it's TFCBT. We really like our acronyms in this field. They're providing that sort of treatment. They're providing play therapy, and they're providing treatment in a space that's designed for that if you went to our website and you took a tour of the space, so we have a virtual tour, you might see the rooms and think this is a kid's wonderful playground. They're going to be able to really find things to play and slides and swings and toys. But it's really intentionally designed with tools for the therapist to be able to provide a space for healing for children and reframing things. So we serve children of many ages. 5 is generally the youngest we can serve for treatment. And when you think about being a 5 or 6-year-old kid and what it means to communicate the history of abuse that you've experienced, you're probably not going to do it sitting on a couch talking about how you feel or analyzing your thinking. You're going to do it through play. And so we have spaces that are equipped to be able to allow a child to communicate through play. I was recently in a learning environment where the director was sharing some of her knowledge with interns that were new in the role. And they were talking about a little girl who was playing dolls. And in this scenario, the doll had been dropped off in her care by the mom, the doll's mom. And the little girl had an abuse history where she was told not to disclose her experiences. So when she was playing with this doll, the doll might get hurt. And then her, as the caregiver for this doll, would say to the therapist, don't tell mom that this doll got hurt. And so the therapist through play could send a message like, how do you think mom would feel not knowing that her doll baby got hurt? Or do you think mom would really want to know this? And so through play, they bring the skill with these children to be able to re-guide that thinking. We also had the benefit when we moved into the space of having a sensory room designed for kids to use in their treatment. And so there can be, it looks like a playground. It looks like there's a swing and a slide and all of that. But again, it's used very intentionally in treatment with our interns and our therapists to be able to set up kids to have different environments to empower them to communicate. So it might be that a kid is at the top of the slide and the therapist is sitting on the floor of the room, and that creates that power differential. Now I'm above you, maybe I feel more comfortable talking about my experiences, and the therapy can continue to work on the experience that the child has had, how they might build healthy coping mechanisms and be comfortable with the fact that they've had this experience and start to incorporate the coping that's going to get them through the days. Another way that a swing might be used, and a swing is a very regulating thing. And it's not just, if I can go on a tangent, it's not just kids that need to experience regulation and need to know how their body is reacting to certain environments and to calm your body and be able to be in different settings. So this is applicable. I mean, anything where we talk about self-care and regulation and those sorts of things can be applicable to children and adults. I'm always surprised when, as an adult, I'm reminded to take a deep breath because I forget. I think I tell my kids that so many times. I forget that as an adult, we need that. So going into a stressful environment, you might take a breath and you might make sure that you're prepared to calm your body down, be able to be in a hard meeting, to take a hard phone call, to have a hard conversation. And that's part of what we're building up with kids in our space here is, how can they start to recognize dysregulation in their bodies and then work to calm back down. Part of that is practicing it when they're calm, and part of that is incorporating it into things that feel dysregulating. So with the example of the swing, we had a child in our space that had disclosed sexual abuse, and the parent was really struggling to figure out how to provide physical affection to the child in a way that respected boundaries for that child, because those boundaries had been violated, and she wanted to embrace her child, but really wanted to also respect the fact that somebody had done horrible things. And so they used the swing as a way to build that in while the child could also be regulated. So it was like a swing that has like a sack that you're kind of sitting in, like a little pocket. And when the swing would come near to mother, she would embrace the child and then let the child go. And so for the child, it was regulating, so she could learn to accept the physical comfort that she wanted to receive from her mom. And for the mom, she could, begin to re-embrace the child again and offer that physical connection. And so, for me, these stories about the work that's being done by therapists is really awe-inspiring. And I think it's important to understand that this work has to be done in our community because these things are happening in our community. And I think to some extent, the last couple of years have really highlighted that. I think child mental health, I think adult mental health, it's getting more to the forefront. I think that there is concern about children having safe people to go to and receiving treatment for experiences of abuse and neglect. And it's starting to become a little bit more mainstream, but I still wouldn't be surprised to know that there's a lot of people in Dane County who don't understand, exactly how many children experience this. And to take an opportunity to talk about the work is really important to me because, as I shared with my story and experience with CASA is, I don't think it's uncommon in any of these situations for a family to be ready to move on when they have completed services, whether that was therapy treatment or a court case with the CASA involvement. Even if they did really hard work that they should be proud of, they did the things that needed to be done to create a really healthy family, something worth really praising and holding up. There's such a stigma attached to these experiences. There's a stigma attached to sexual abuse and assault, and there's a stigma attached to, not being the perfect parent to requiring system involvement, there's an embarrassment that can come along with that. And so it can be really hard to say I did this hard work, because at the same time, you have to acknowledge that that work needed to be done in the first place. And as a society, we don't often embrace that people are really making strides in their healing and in developing really good and strong families. And I think that that very much can be said for the parent to child program, which is our supervised visitation program. They provide services to parents that are court ordered to have supervised contact with their children. And that can happen through so many different scenarios. It'd be hard to make assumptions about why families would come to us for those services. And yet I think that when we think about stigma and we think about the assumptions about families that are involved in the child welfare system, I think we're prone to do that, despite the fact that there's just so many reasons why somebody might require supportive services from the system. And so to talk about needing that supervised contact, I know we had a parent that we served last year, and actually we served her over a relatively short period of time. It was less than a year, and that's not super uncommon. There's a number of our services that might go less than a year, but one trend that we've noticed with the system is that families are really up against layered challenges. They're really up against needing to kind of take on a few things at once. So it's never just one thing, it's 3 or 4 things. And so our services are provided to families over longer periods of time than they were maybe a few years ago. And for us, that means that, we're not a one-touch agency. We are an agency that works with families over longer periods of time. So I can't hold up, really big numbers that are being served, but I can tell you that over the course of a year, families are being served really in depth in a way that helps to stabilize them at a time when it feels like everything's kind of a little bit unstable, And so we have this mom that was coming to us, and she was in a relationship that was domestically violent, and she was had some substance use disorder, and she had an infant child, and it was deemed that that child wasn't safe in her care and was placed out of home. And so she was, tasked with support from a social worker and case planning and the child welfare system to work to reunify to get that child back. But that same question remains, like, should she address, the substance use disorder? Should she address the fact that she's in a relationship that has unhealthy, violent dynamics to it? Should she do both of those things at once? How would you do both things at once? It feels like 2 mountains to climb. How do you climb them both at the same time? She opted to leave the relationship that she was in, and needed to get housing and a job, which again, those are 2 more mountains. The housing insecurity of Dean County is very real, and the ability to get to a job at a central location, public transportation, all of those things. But, mom did it in a short period of time. She was very motivated. She got a job and was able to get an apartment, and then that job actually gave her a promotion to a management position, which further stabilized her in her environment. And she was coming to us for her visitation. So she came to our location to have her visits with her infant child. And those visits were getting longer. So the social worker and case planners had decided that she had earned more time with her child and was still having that here at our location. And we really think about how our location is set up for that sort of family visitation. And no, it doesn't feel good to feel like you're being scrutinized during contact with your child. But we work to set up an environment that feels, I always say, kind of a little bit like an apartment, as much as any business can feel like an apartment, but having, soft furniture and soft window coverings, a dining room table. We also have a full kitchen so families can cook a meal together. And we really thought about how to create an environment that would feel comfortable for a 15-year-old to come to and a baby or a toddler to come to. And so there's different spaces that are designed for those uses, or we make them more manageable. And that's something that I experienced when I was working with teenagers in the CASA program, is they would say sometimes that their visitation with their parent might feel like it was in a conference room or in a nursery. And as a 15-year-old, that was a really hard environment to be the only 2 hours you got to spend with your parent for that week. And so, as much as possible, we try to create environments that felt like they could be aged up or aged down. But beyond that, parents and families can work towards having those visits in their own homes. And so that's what this mom was able to accomplish, is she was having the visits here on site. And when she had reached the point where the social workers and case planners determined that she could have it in her home, that she had gotten, the family interaction specialist could go to her home to supervise the contact there, and then move on from there where the visits got longer. Her goal all this time was that, Christmas was an important holiday to her, and she really wanted to have her child placed with her for Christmas. It was to be the child's first Christmas, and that's all she wanted. And a few days prior to Christmas, she happened to get the court hearing on the calendar where the judge did determine that the child was safe to go home, and they got to celebrate Christmas in the home together. And I think about, that's, an example of a family that worked really, really hard over a very short period of time. It can take a really long time to address some of the concerns that we see in system involvement, whether that's mental health or substance use disorder or violent family dynamics. These are really big things that don't change overnight, that you can expect that there may be some progress, and then, you can falter in that progress, and it can take a step back. And so, as I shared, and I'll just repeat, it's really the families that deserve the credit. We feel so privileged as a staff to provide the space where this work can be done with families. But we're really here as, providing that environment, providing that support. But without the families doing the hard work, there wouldn't be healing that happens. And so just to share that with everybody. And I think the last thing that I'll say is just another reminder about how, whether you're doing work within this field or any other field, or even just in your own personal lives, the need for us to take care of ourselves so that we can continue sustaining things moving forward. We all bring value to our lives. And, when I think about working in this field and the exposure that we have to vicarious trauma, which is that we ourselves didn't directly experience the traumatic events that our families have encountered, but we're so directly exposed to them that we feel the effects of those things. It's something that we're so mindful of because we have to take care of ourselves to stay in the work. Something that feels really important to me, and I think I really value systems that hold this up, is the ability to stay in the work. We are seeing kind of a mass exodus of people in the helping profession, and families are still in need and they still need help. And so to the extent that we take care of ourselves so that we can come back next year and provide another year of experience to these families in this environment, it's just more and more important that our systems, like our social work system, our social workers are working really hard with families that are up against really complicated things. And to the extent that we can keep them in the work through self-care and understanding, curiosity rather than assumptions, I think is really valuable for us to be able to do, and valuable and applicable to your own lives as well. So, I can't directly draw the parallel to the thing that you do in your lives, but to the extent that the business that you contribute your time to, if you can sustain yourself in that work, you're one more resource that stays in that work. And so when you do things that you're passionate about in your lives and you can continue to apply that experience, I can't say enough about how valuable that is. And it's something that's very, in our field, something that we're very acutely aware of, not necessarily always the best practice at it. We know what it means to take care of ourselves, and it's not necessarily what's on Pinterest about, taking a bath or lighting a candle, although that might play into it. Sometimes self-care is the things that don't feel good doing in the moment, like being active or eating a healthy meal or sleeping a good night's sleep. Giving yourself a break from screens. If we all live on autopilot so much and go to the things that feel good, sometimes it is our, bodily health that suffers at the end of the day, and taking care of our bodily health is more important than ever. So I'll just have that as a final plug for the work that I'll talk about here with you today. And I left some time at the end for questions. So I'll invite Monica to come back up to see if there were any questions that came through the chat, or if there's anything that I can further expand upon.
Hey. Thank you so much for this. I've learned quite a bit. So when I initially was toying with the idea of having an event, with Canopy Center, I I had a very, very general understanding of what it is that you guys do. And I dug a little bit deeper and had more compassion for it and a better understanding of what it is that you do and how you do it and why you do it. And now, just now, having you here just gave me an even deeper understanding, but also this um, great amount of gratitude. I'm so grateful for what you do and for the Canopy Center even being a thing. It's it's I'm looking for words right now. So in some ways, you almost think like, oh, it's unfortunate that this needs to be around, but it's so great that it is around.
Right.
And another thing that you had touched on, I have a couple of notes here. So don't be a social worker from your friend. That's intimate from your friend. My sister has an MSW from UW Milwaukee, and she was in social work for many years. And now she literally introduces herself as a recovering social worker. It's heavy work. It's heavy work. And so hats off, much love, hearts open to everyone out there that dares to be a social worker and be in it and have that type of compassion, because I know that it can be draining. Another thing you talked about was mental health and the importance of us and our children taking care of our mental health. It mental health and seeing a therapist has such a stigma. Even just 5 to 7 years ago, it had such a stigma. And now I think the pandemic kind of boosted it, but now it's a thing and it's okay, and there's no stigma and there's no judgment, and people are openly and freely doing this, and I absolutely love it. I think it's making our world a better place. We have one question come in from Ashley. She says, she's working for CASA in Tennessee, and it's amazing to hear all the things that Canopy Center is doing and how CASA is part of that. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't
actually. Yeah, I mean, we're found all over the country. And so I feel lucky that we're able to deliver that model here. And there's variation with states, of course, but I've actually been down to Tennessee because sometimes we have kids that are placed at that kind of distance out of Wisconsin. So I've had the opportunity to travel down and occasionally been in touch with some of the programs down there. But it's nice that there are programs across the state, because it also for us means that we can reach out to other states and get their vantage point when we see trends. Sometimes some of those programs will come up with some really great groundbreaking advocacy and family support models that then we can steal and copy back here. So
my question for you is, my first question for you is, I understand that this is a court-appointed process, and that's how Canopy Center becomes involved with these families. Can a family request, so say the court system is like, hey, this is done, we're done, you're doing a great job. Can the family then still come and say, hey, I still need support, I still need help from you guys?
So CASA and Parent to Child are the two programs that require the court order to be able to serve. And then the OASIS program, you wouldn't need that. Referral sources can come from, any place, including schools and families themselves, that sort of thing. When it comes to CASA, I've never had somebody who's not child welfare involved ask for services, with the exception of sometimes family custody cases can be a really challenging part of the system. And people are really concerned about their children while going through custody battles. And so every once in a while we get contacted in that way. But yeah, we're limited particularly with CASA, to, CHIPS cases, which is Chapter 48, Child in Need of Protection or Services. That's what allows us the ability to operate. But if somebody said, I'm really looking for support for my kids, there are other mentoring services that are here in Dane County. I'm sure Big Brothers Big Sisters is something that, a program that a lot of people are familiar with. There's other mentoring services that might have different goals. So dependent on why they might be asking for, a supportive, more naturalistic mentoring relationship for their child, I think there are referrals to be made. And I think that's something that often gets asked of me is what's the difference between maybe one of, those other mentoring services like Big Brothers Big Sisters and CASA. And I think that it's really complicated to do the work where you're advocating within the court system or within the child advocacy system. So it's the specialized training that our volunteers have. And I think the willingness to get into, a situation where it's going to be really challenging because there is an abuse or neglect history. But for the OASIS program, the treatment program, families can self-refer if they're appropriate for services. If the child has experienced sexual abuse and is really struggling to cope with that, they can access that. And then parent to child, they can be court ordered through custody or through child welfare. So there's a few different ways to access services with the agency.
That's understandable. Thank you. Have you guys seen an uptick in the need for your services with the pandemic?
Yeah, I think we've seen it fluctuate to the point where it's hard to exactly pin it down. So what we know is that our referrals come from the court system, so that for the CASA program, so that means that it's how many families and children are involved in the system, and that has fluctuated based on different initiatives that the county has done. It's a really big deal when you think about the child welfare system being involved. I had it relayed to me one time, it's like the government in your living room. And so there should be a high threshold for that to be the situation. And I think that our county is really working to, respect that threshold and find informal ways to support families that don't require full system involvement, that sort of thing. So we have seen more demand, but it's not been just like a straight uptick. I think with the OASIS program, one of the things that might be surprising is that sometimes the primary need for kids to receive support might not be their sexual abuse history. They might be experiencing so many other challenges in other ways. So to the extent that we're equipped to respond to that need, we work to do that. But if the child says that, what they're really experiencing is depression and anxiety, and they're not looking for coping treatment around their sexual abuse, which might come as a surprise, we might not be the best modeled program for them. And so what I've seen, and again, I speak to just the trend that we see, and we see a subsection of what's happening in our community, but that child mental health services in general are the high need. So whether or not we're the best fit for that or not depends on the call that we get. But we have, a really great administrative director who is, always there to kind of talk to families about whether or not we're the best fit for them and what we can provide service-wise to them. So I don't think it's been a direct uptick, but certainly mental health is taking a hit. Families are dealing with more complicated cases. I think the example that I gave about the parent to child mother who worked so hard to reunify with her infant child, I think that is a trend that we're noticing. It's not one thing that a parent has to work on. It's sometimes it's a layered multitude of things. And so the complexity of challenges that families are up against is increasing, and access to services is very real. So, I mentioned like a mass exodus in the helping profession. We're seeing long wait lists for treatment for therapy, and we're seeing turnover in the social work field. And I think when we see that in conjunction with more complicated family dynamics, that's what's increasing, without a doubt. It might not just be the numbers, but the intensity of services that are needed.
Most definitely. My last question for you, one thing with the court system I've noticed in Dane County or Wisconsin altogether is that with the pandemic and lots of things being shut down and not necessarily being able to be in person for a lot of cases, things have gotten pushed back, and a lot of court cases are building up. Is this type of situation one that would take priority? And have you seen any pushback, like hearing dates and things like that? Have things been getting delayed and piling up?
Sure. I would say there was absolutely a period of time where all of us throughout Wisconsin, I would say probably experienced that, like without a doubt. I can say that without having been in every county in Wisconsin, but knowing my vantage point and my colleagues within the CASA network across the state, there were periods of time for that. I think locally here in Dane County, it feels like it's the criminal system that is more primarily backed up. In fact, I can tell you that our judges, there's 4 judges that serve on the juvenile judge rotation. Historically, they've now moved one of the 4 over to criminal processing to try to kind of catch up to the backlog. And it's rare for a child welfare case to have a criminal case in conjunction, but I would say the parent to child program experience is that sometimes the reason why we're court ordered to provide supervised contact is because there's potentially pending criminal charges. And I've definitely continued to see that where we're expecting that somebody's going to complete that criminal trial and it gets pushed back another 3 months, another 3 months, another 3 months. And that can have a significant impact, of course, on families when, and some of these criminal charges are interfamily violent dynamics that have occurred. And so, working to continue to provide services to families when it just feels like it keeps getting pushed back, and wanting to make sure we're providing a safe environment for children to have visitation. So, we've had situations where, like I said, interfamily violence is the situation. And so a parent who, was the nonviolent partner in that relationship has to send their child to have visitation with the person who's been criminally charged with that harm. But because they're not convicted, they do have, the legal right to continue to have access to their child. And so trying to really provide an environment that honors how hard that is for a family member to send. And then also knowing that, without that conviction, without that trial, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't want to make any presumptions. You want to provide an environment for that parents as well, that it's a healthy environment for them to have interactions with their children where their children are safe, and that it's something that feels as natural as it possibly could, while having somebody there to make observations while you're having those interactions with the child. So I think the delays on the criminal side, I think we'll see that for a little bit longer, because it's not just the helping profession that has staffing. I think we see staffing levels challenged in other parts of the system that can also be the cause for some delays, but they're working hard to get caught up.
Understandable. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today, and for just taking time to be here with us and inform us on such an important topic. We really appreciate your time and really appreciate the work that you do. I had another question brewing, and it just hasn't come back to the front of my mind yet. But yes, if it comes up later, I'm gonna send you a message just so you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here to present. I'm not hard to find. So if there's anything that anyone wants to ask or share, you can easily Google my contact information.
Awesome. So this work that you do, you do it with so much passion and so much compassion. Has this always been a dream of yours to work in this type of field, or did it just happen for you?
It really has been. I think the reason why that anecdote with a family friend stood out to me is because I think I was already drawn to that field. And then when I read the book about the CASA role in Florida, it really spoke to me that there is a system here that is responding to families. I've always had a passion for, there are children who are raised in different environments and what can give them equal chances for healthy adulthood. And I think that I've always been aware of that, the differences and opportunities that are available and difference of experiences. And so this felt like the way that I could contribute. I'm sure I could have landed in a lot of places. There's a lot of organizations doing really important work in our community, doing similar work to support families that are going through hardships. And this just happened to be where I landed. But the entire field is a passion of mine, and knowing that, you know, people who've been doing, I'm always, anytime I see somebody who's been doing the work for 20 years or longer, I say, like, what is your self-care plan? What are you doing to sustain yourself in this work? Because they're like my unicorns in this work, and they're out there, they're doing this work right here. So
yeah, I have a friend who retired from social work after like 32 years, and I'm like, okay, and you're still alive and you still look great, and,
right.
and you're
How?
yeah, what are you doing? Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned that you guys do have volunteers, and that means that you have volunteer opportunities. For someone that is looking to volunteer or get involved, what's the path for them? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim is our volunteer coordinator here at the agency. And so he's always the one who knows which programs have which volunteer opportunities available to them. Many of our volunteer opportunities are longer term volunteer opportunities. They're not, you know, one touch opportunities, but that's not to say that we wouldn't entertain possibilities for that, but we take volunteers in pretty much all of the programs, as well as from the administrative end of things. So, you know, we have volunteers that can provide childcare for children. So when you're a parent that's coming and you have multiple children and one of them is in treatment, you know, we have childcare that we try to make available to those families so that they can kind of, you know, those parents can kind of just like use that time to decompress. And, you know, we have a lot of glitter and, you know, a lot of toys and a lot, you know, so they can be in the childcare area and have that time to kind of decompress, or if they need to go back and talk to the therapist, their child will be cared for at that time. But we also have, you know, just simply front desk opportunities where you might not provide that hands-on support for children in the space, but you might keep, you know, the phones answered and the desk running and you know, those sorts of things. So there's a plethora of opportunities, and Jim can always direct people based on their interest level.
Awesome. Last thing, where the holiday season is among us, I'm sure that you have families that are in need. And do you have a program or a system where you are collecting gifts or treats for families? And how would people be able to contribute to that if they want?
Sure. We do our best to channel some of those donations, but we also are mindful about there's certain boundaries. So like a therapeutic relationship has gift giving boundaries around it and that sort of thing. So, you know, I'll say, I think it's Jim again, that would be the best point of contact for those things. But to the extent that we can put a donation like that to use to get things out to families, whether it's winter gear and blankets, or whether it's toys to put under the tree for the year, you know, and sometimes we can even direct those donations straight to our county social workers so that they can provide them to families as well. So if there are people who are interested in that, we can see what we can do about making sure that those get to families that would really feel that support this time of year.
Awesome. Thanks again. I really, really appreciate your time and everything that you've done to get to this point with us today. Thank you everyone out there for tuning in today and for just listening and tuning into what is going on in such an important topic and such an important program and resource that's out there. So yeah, reach out to Canopy Center if this mood strikes you to want to volunteer or help out in any way, and see what it is that you can do for these types of families and programs in our community. Again, thank you all for tuning in today, and keep dreaming fearlessly. Goodbye.